Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Market Wrap. So I'm back in Philly after being home for 10 days with the family. I'm pretty sure they were ready for me to get out of the house. It's a new year and I can't wait to see what the market brings us in 2022, but I know it's going to be a fun ride. So 3 pieces I loved this week, and based on some advice I got from a friend, I went a little more vintage this week. Now, Watchbox is best known for modern Patek, Rolex, Journe. Now, what most people don't know is we're also big players in the vintage world. It tends to get sold before it ever hits the site, so the world doesn't always get to see it. Now, the first piece is a classic LeCoultre chronograph. It's actually a calculator chronograph, the E2647. Has a value 72 movement, certainly a really rare tool watch from the 60s. Just a crazy cool vintage chronograph that can also help you do math. Now, the second piece is a 2005 Bethune DB15, perpetual in platinum. These early Bethunes have become extremely collectible. I love their perpetuals. This is just a great piece to get back in the collection. And last, but certainly not least, is a Patek 3971G. Yes, 3971. Now, most of the world is very familiar with 3970. It replaced the 2499 in 1986, and the first series was released with a solid caseback. Patek then made a model reference 3971 with a sapphire caseback, and for 2 years concurrently produced both models. They then merged them into a single reference 3970 with 2 casebacks, a solid and a see-through. Now, these 3971s were only produced for 2 years, were mostly produced in yellow gold and rose gold, as back in the late 80s and early 90s, most collectors would buy those metals. White metals were much rarer. This particular piece also has oversized hallmarks, and the fact that it's a complete set with the original box, papers, makes this an amazing example of one of the rarest watches in the world. Now, while I hate New Year's Eve, I absolutely never go anywhere. I love starting a new year with a fresh reset and new opportunity. Now, this year is especially exciting since we are coming off what for most people was the best year in the history of watches. From manufacturers to retailers, auctions, independent brands, to the pre-owned markets, records were broken non-stop and the demand continues to show strength. Now, I have a finance background, spending most of my career as a CFO, so I'm typically very conservative and always get nervous about markets that move very quickly and show these signs of irrational exuberance. And I know everyone I speak to wants to know the same thing. Will this last? Now, I've spent a lot of time over the last few weeks thinking about this and thought it would be fun to take a look at really what I think is going on in the market. Now, first of all, and most importantly in the watch business, production growth is limited. The biggest player, Rolex, is a charitable foundation, and its only goal is to produce the best watches. They don't react like a normal business, who in a market like this would just add a third shift, ramp up production, jack up prices, and print money. Now, Rolex will increase production, they will raise prices, but both will be single-digit moves. Now, Patek, while too will raise production, the increases will again be in the single digits. Most small independent brands might be able to ramp up production and certainly at a higher percentage level, but going from 200 to 300 pieces is a huge percentage jump. It still only puts an extra 100 watches into the market. Now, I do think we'll see some new brands launch. Many independents have done great. It will draw more players to set out on their own and to try to launch their own brands. But this is basically a zero-sum game, as most of these new brand watchmakers come from the majors and will not make a big impact in supply. To train new watchmakers takes years, if not a generation, and to build more production capacity can just not be done quickly. And finally, the culture in Switzerland will not allow for a large production ramp-up. Working overtime, 6 days, extra shifts are very foreign concepts to the Swiss. And even after the lockdown, we saw them, after being closed for 3 months, still take 3 weeks vacation in August. So from a supply side, very little will change in 2022. Now on the demand side, most people focus on the crazy prices being paid for Journes and Pateks, but I like to focus on core models. We have trouble keeping in stock a stainless steel Submariner, steel and gold Datejust. Demands for independence, awareness of watches and watchmaking in general has grown dramatically over the past few years, and I expect this will continue. Now, while demand's not slowing and supply staying stable, I think we're going to see a very similar market over the next 6 months that we've seen over the past 6 months. Shortages of key models, demand outstripping supply, will lead to some silly transactions, but I think we will see prices stabilize, and barring a global financial event or catastrophic disruption in the markets, I think the watch market will remain extraordinarily strong for at least the next 12 to 18 months. That was this week's Market Wrap. Look forward to seeing you again next week.